So we are looking at Shabua'uth as a Moad, YaHUaH's appointed covenant encounter. So we're gonna ask someone to read Urkara or Leviticus 23 verse 2.
Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the appointed times of YaHUaH, which you are to proclaim as Kadash gatherings, my appointed times are these.
All right, Thurah for reading. So, from an Hebraic analyst, the term Moad is not a generic festival term. It is derived from the root YaHUaH or YaHUaH's, which conveys the meaning of making an appointment, designating a meeting, or assigning a specific purpose. And if we look in Shabuath, or Exodus 29, verse 43, we're going to ask someone to read. This word was used in that verse. That's the Hebrew word, or the Abrit. I'm going to ask someone to read Shabuath 29, verse 43.
And there I shall meet with the children of Israel, and it shall be made Kadash by my esteem.
So the word meet there is used. So that's the YaHUaH, the Abrit word for meet right there. As you just read, and there I will meet with the children of Israel. So the Shabuath as a Moad is not simple celebration of agriculture or historical memory. It is a covenantal encounter, meeting or meeting designated or designed by YaHUaH himself. It is not subject to human calendrical manipulation, culture interpretation, or sectarian liturgy. Now, from a covenantal standpoint, each Moad serves as a temporal intersection between the shamaym and the arats, a divine convergence point where the Creator summons his people to align with his redemptive trajectory. So we know that the Shabuath is aligned with two main things: the Thurah at Sinai, which is Exodus 19 or Shabuath 19, and also where the outpouring of YaHUaH's Ruach in Ma'asim or Acts 2, marking it as a pivotal point of impartation and empowerment. All right? In other words, giving and receiving of the Ruach. So, theological implication. A Hebraic covenant-based theology understand Moadim not merely as a feast, but as a heavenly rehearsal, or Kadash Mikra. These dedicated convocation function as oaths. Reaffirming the participants' alliance to YaHUaH. Shabuath being one of the 3 pilgrimage feasts intensifies this function. It pulls the worshipper into the divine timetable, orienting them away from the worldly rhythms into the cycle of his reign. So Shabuath as a mode is therefore an eschatological rehearsal, covenantal renewal, and a divine empowerment converging into one dedicated space in time. All right. So eschatological rehearsal is understanding what the different moedim stand for and preparing ourselves. So this rehearsal and meeting, time is counted and not dated. So looking at same with Kara, Leviticus 23, looking at verse 15. You shall count for yourself from the Yom after the Shabbat, 7 complete Shabbat shall be counted. And the 7, based on when we started, the 7 will be coming on May the 25th. So from the Hebraic linguistic emphasis, the command usapartham lakam literal means you shall count for yourself. The rule safar implies enumeration, ordered, and even rehearsing a narrative, as in the Safar book or story. So this linguistic root connects counting into storytelling and revelation. The command to count is not merely arithmetic, it is covenantal choreography. It demands active participation in a spiritual process of becoming a 49 Yamin ascension from the redemption of Matzarim to the covenantal hour of Sinai. So theological construct. In covenantal theology, this period represents the transformation of a delivery people of a delivered people into the Kadashim. The count emphasizes obedience as a spiritual discipline. Unlike modern fixed date celebration, the Shabua'uth resists the calendrical complacency. It demands vigilance, yom by yom, week by week. This is a Hebrew pedagogy of time, being Kadash pedagogy of time, being Kadash is not stumbling upon. This is a measure and walk out. The people are not simply waiting for Shabuath, they are ascending to it. The structure, anticipation mirrors the ladder of spiritual refinement, a maturation of desire for YaHUaH's voice, instruction, and presence. In other words, we long for more of YaHUaH. So the implication, by commanding a count instead of stating a fixed date, we see YaHUaH decentralizes human control and places the responsibility of spiritual expectancy on his people. It is a journey of discipline longing. Counting cultivates attentiveness and anoints the mundane. It weds time to purpose. In this way, time becomes Kadash ground. So looking at the covenant at Sinai, Shabuath as the nation withdrawal to YaHUaH. So I'm going to ask someone to read Shamuth 19, reading from verse 17 to 20. And after you finish read that, read Shamuth 20 and read verse 1.
And Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet with Elohim, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. And Mount Sinai was in smoke, all of it, because YaHUaH descended upon it in fire. And its smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace, and all the mountain trembled exceedingly. And when the blast of the ram's horn sounded long and became very strong, Moshe spoke, and Elohim answered him by voice. And YaHUaH came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain. YaHUaH called Moshe to the top of the mountain, and Moshe went up.
All right, chapter 20, verse 1.
And Elohim spoke all these words, saying,
All right. Hold on. So from a Hebrew legal marital framework, the Shabbat commemorates YaHUaH's covenantal betrothal to Israel. The events at Sinai are framed in Hebrew thought as a marriage covenant. So the language of Shamuth 19 that we read, but looking at verse 5 to 6, it mirrors the language of covenantal possession in betrothal. So we can read Shamuth 19, verse 5 to 6.
And now, if you diligently obey my voice and guard my covenant, then you shall be my treasured possession above all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a reign of a Kohanim and a Kodesh nation. Those are the words which you are to speak to the children of Yasharah.
So the for reading. So it's like for those who are married and we made a vow to each other, we try our best to honor those vow or katuba, honor those katuba. So here is YaHUaH telling us if we obey his voice, we be his treasured possession or sagala. So the Hebrew Greek word kul, often translated voice, also means sound or thunder. It's relational. The people didn't simply hear commands, they encounter the divine voice, which is described deeply experimental terms. Smoke, fire, trembling. This is all happening at Mount Sinai. So this encounter was not legalistic, but transformational, a national immersion into a national immersion into divine presence. So what's the theological depth? So the 10 words are the bar given at Sinai are not arbitrary regulation, but the terms of relational covenant. They are bridal stipulation, not for salvation, but for union. In Hebrew thought, the covenant precedes command. Love precedes the Thurah. This is reflected in how YaHUaH first redeemed Israel from Mitzrayim before ever giving commands at Mount Sinai or at Sinai. So the Shabuath becomes the moment when a redeemed people becomes a cleansed, dedicated bride. The marriage at Sinai is echoed later in the prophetic laments, which we can read in Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah 2 verse 2 and Hosea 2 verse 19 to 20. And I ask someone to read it. Pause. Anyone?
Yirmiyahu 2:2.
Khan?
Oh, Zachariah, you could go ahead.
No, Yirmiyahu.
Go, and you shall cry in the hearing of Jerusalem, saying, Thus said YaHUaH, I remember you, the kindness of your youth, the love of your bridehood, and when you went after me in the wilderness, in a land that was not sown.
To the reading. And Hosea 2 verse 19 to 20.
And I shall take you as a bride unto me forever, and take you as a bride unto me in righteousness, and in right ruling, and kindness, and compassion. And I shall take you as a bride unto me in trustworthiness, and you shall know YaHUaH.
So we see what scripture showing that the betrothal paradigm was foundational to Israel's self-understanding. So what's the implication? Understanding Shabuath as marital covenant compels believers to view obedience not as legalistic burden, but relational fidelity. The commands are not ways, they are vows of ahabah, or of love. To remember Shabuath is to rehearse the wedding, to remain loyal to the bridegroom, whose voice once shook the mountain and will shake the shamaym again. And we can reference this to the Abri or Hebrew 12, verse 26. And I read, whose voice shook the arats then, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more, I shake not only the arats, but also the shamaym. So looking at the first fruit offering, a pattern of dedicated increase. So Uikar 23, looking at verse 17. And it read, bring from your dwelling for a wave offering 2 loaves of bread, and of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour, they are baked with leaven. First fruits to YaHUaH. So from the Hebrew agriculture and spiritual imagery, the first room are the Bakarim were not just an agricultural gift, they were a decoration. The Abrit root Bakar means early, choice, chief, or firstborn. So we see first fruit were understood as covenant markers of ownership and stewardship. The Shabua'uth is the culmination of the grain harvest, especially the wheat one, which carries strong Mashiach imagery. And we can read YaHUaH's or John 6, verse 35, just to reference it.
And Yahusha said to them, I am the bread of Chai. He who comes to me shall not get hungry at all, and he who believes in me shall not get thirsty at all.
Hold on, already. So we see here the Mashiach imagery taking place in YaHUaH's 6, verse 35. So the act of waving the loaves, that is stated in Unleavend 23, verse 20, is a public elevation of what YaHUaH has given. So symbolizing both gratitude and offering back the best portion unto YaHUaH. So this symbolizes that YaHUaH cleanses real, imperfect people. A theme picked up in the renewed covenant, and that is in Acts 2, verse 5 to 11, and Ephesians 2, verse 13 to 19. So we're going to reference these two scripture. Can I ask someone to read it for us?
Now in Yerushalayim there were dwelling Yahudim, dedicated men from every nation under the shamaym. And when this sound came to be, the crowd came together and were confused, because everyone heard them speak in their own language. And they were all amazed and marveled, saying to each other, "Look, are not all these who speak Galileans? And how do we hear, each one in our own language in which we were born? Parthians and Madiites and Elaimites, and those dwelling in Aram, Naharaim, both Yehuda and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, both Phrygia and Pamphylia, Mitzrayim and parts of Libui, and Kuriini, visitors from Rome, both Yehudim and converts, Cretians and Arabs. We hear them speaking in our own tongues the great deeds of Elohim.
For reading, and Ephesians 2, verse 13 to 19.
But now in Mashiach Yahusha, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Hamashiach. For he is our peace, who has made both one, and having broken down the partition of the barrier, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, the law of the commands in dogma, so as to create in himself one renewed man from the two, thus making peace, and to completely restore to favor both of them unto Elohim in one body through the stake, having destroyed the enmity by it. And having come, he brought as Bashura, peace to you who were far off, and peace to those near. Because through him we both have access to the Father, or Ab, by one root. So then, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the Kadashim and members of the household of Elohim.
YaHUaH. So, for the theological construct, the first fruit offering at Shabuath teaches covenantal reciprocity.
Reciprocity. It's a bit of a
tongue twister. So YaHUaH brings increase, but the first and best are to be returned to him in acknowledgement that our provision originates from his hand. Moreover, the two leaven loaves demonstrate an important Hebrew paradox. Though leaven or kamat is often associated with wrongs or corruption. And we can read this in Shamuth, Exodus 12, verse 15. But leaven also pictures growth, influence, and transformation. Now we're going to look at Matthew 13, verse 33. We're gonna read both. We're gonna read Shamut, Exodus 12 verse 15. That shows that leaven is associated with corruption or wrongs. And then we're gonna read Matat Yahu, Matthew 13 verse 33. That shows leaven used as transformation. All right, so we're gonna ask someone to read Shamut first, and then Matthew second. Anyone?
7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Indeed, on the first day you shall cause leaven to cease from your houses. But whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that being shall be cut off from YaHUaH's.
All right, Thurah and Matat Yahu, Matthew 13.
Another parable he spoke to them, the reign of the shamaym is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal until all was leavened.
Thurah for reading. So we see the contrast in different scripture, where, as I said earlier, one was seen as leaven used as being wrong and corruption, and the other one now where leaven is used as influence and a transformation. Now we see Shaul or Paul uses it to contrast malice and wickedness in 1 Corinthians 5 verse 8 with the leaven of sincerity and truth. So we can ask someone to read that for us to see what Paul was said in 1 Corinthians 5 verse 8.
So then let us observe the festival, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of evil and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth.
There we go. So we see where Paul uses it as what you just said, as leaven of sincerity and truth. So in a brief thought, symbols are functional. Their meaning changes based on context and usage, not static categorization. The loaves are not offered on the altar where the leaven is forbidden, but waved before YaHUaH, a distinction revealing that what is unworthy for the altar is not unworthy for cleansing and anointing. So implication, the first root principle extend beyond grain. It applies to lives, family, and purposes. Shabua'uth challenges every child of YaHUaH to bring the first and finest of their increase, time, wisdom, labor, gifts, and worship. All these as a wave offering before YaHUaH. So the dual loaves also signify the coming together of 2 houses. And we read this, so we can reference this to Yakazakal, Ezekiel 37, verse 16 to 22, where the 2 houses would have made in one in Mashiach, who himself the first fruit of the resurrection. So we can read YaHUaH's 37 verse 16 to 22, where we see the coming together of the two houses.
And you, son of man, take a stick for yourself and write on it, for Yehuda and for the children of Yasharal, his companions. Then take another stick and write on it, for Yasaph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Yasharal, his companions. Then bring them together for yourself into one stick, and they shall become one in your hand. And when the children of your people speak to you, saying, won't you show us what you mean by these? Say to them, thus said the Adon Yahuwah, see, I am taking the stick of Yasaph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Yasharal, his companions, and I shall give them unto him with the stick of Yehuda, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. And the sticks on which you shall write shall be in your hand before their eyes. And speak to them, thus says Adon Yahuwah, see, I am taking the children of Yasharal from among the Gentiles, wherever they have gone, and shall gather them from all around, and I shall bring them into their land. And I shall make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Yasharal, and one sovereign shall be sovereign over them all. And let them no longer be two nations, and let them no longer be divided into two reigns.
All right, Thurah. So we see here in YaHUaH's where the two sticks come in as one. Now, 1 Corinthians 15 verse 20. I ask someone to read it for us.
But now Mashiach has been raised from the dead and has become the first fruit of those having fallen asleep.
Thurah for reading. So we see where Mashiach himself, the first fruit of the resurrection. So looking at unity in diversity. And we read Mahasim, Acts 2 verse 5 earlier. And we know the story of the Shabuath in Masahim 2, which intentionally echoes the confusion that happened in Genesis, sheet 11, verse 1 to 9. If someone could read that for us. The confusion at Babel. Read sheet Genesis 11, verse 1 to 9.
And it came to be, all the earth had one language and one speech. And it came to be as they departed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the shamaym, and make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over all the face of the earth. Then Yahuwah came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And Yahuwah said, look, they are one people, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. And now they are not going to be withheld from doing whatever they plan to do. Come, let us go there and confuse their language, so that they do not understand one another's speech. And Yahuwah scattered them from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. That is why its name was called Babel, because there Yahuwah had confused the language of all the earth, and from there Yahuwah scattered them over the face of all the earth.
All right, Thurah for reading. Thurah for reading. So we see here that the language were divided to out human pride. But while in Ma'asima Acts and at Shabua'uth, we see where the language were used to unify, to honor, and to lift up the Most High YaHUaH. So one act we see disperse humanity, and the other gather them together. So in Bereshit 11, mankind try to make a name, or the average Hashem, for themselves. But while in Ma'asima Acts, the name of YaHUaH is proclaimed by the rule through every tongue. So the covenantal reversal. So where Babel caused scattering, Shabua'uth brought regathering. The Abrit Nabim, or the prophets, often spoke of a time when YaHUaH would gather his people from the nation. And we can reference all of this to Adabarim, or Deuteronomy 30, verse 3 to 4, Isaiah 11, verse 12, and YaHUaH's 20, verse 41, where we see the prophets continue to mention about the gathering of his people from different nations. So in Acts, during the time of Shabuath, was a down payment of the prophetic return, or in other words, that was said by the Nabim about the regathering of his people. So that took place, or down payment took place in Ma'asim 2, or Acts 2. So the fact that Yahudim and converts from various nations were all hearing the mighty works of YaHUaH, and this is all taking place in Ma'asim 2, verse 9 to 11, Acts 2, verse 9 to 11, in their native language, is witness to the Ruach's power to unite through covenant, not to erase ethnic identity, but to redeem it into worship. So implication. The Shabua'uth reveals that unity in YaHUaH is not uniformity. YaHUaH by his Ruach speaks all languages, visits all nations, and makes them one olive tree. And we can read Romans 11, verse 17 to 24. I'm going to ask someone to read it for us.
And if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, have been grafted in among them, and came to share the root and fatness of the olive tree, do not boast against the branches. And if you boast, you do not bear the root, but the root you. You shall say then, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Good. By unbelief they were broken off, and you stand by belief. Do not be arrogant, but revere. For if Elohim did not spare the natural branches, he might not spare you either. See then that the kindness and sharpness of Elohim, and those who follow sharpness, but toward your kindness, if you continue in kindness, otherwise you shall also be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in unbelief, shall be grafted in, for Elohim is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut off out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these who are the natural be grafted into their own olive tree?
For reading. So we see a reality that surpasses political and culture or denominational walls. So every true Shabuath restores the image of Akhad, or being one, not as compromise, but as covenantal harmony. The first fruits of the wheat harvest, covenant people as a living offering. Looking at Numbers, Mother Bar 28, verse 26. Can I ask someone to read it for us? And we're going to look on the Hebrew covenant imagery. Can I ask someone to read Mother Bar on Numbers 28, verse 26?
And on the day of the first fruits, when you bring a new grain offering to YaHUaH at the festival of Shabua'uth, you have a Kodesh gathering. You do no serve out work.
All right. So the Shabuath is the feast of first fruit of the wheat harvest, not to be confused with the barley first fruit presented during the unleavened bread. This marks the completion of the grain cycle, symbolizing the mature fruit of covenant obedience. So in our thought, the concept of first fruit by the Baruchim, Bakurim, is not only about agriculture. It is about covenantal identity and offering. So YaHUaH calls Israel his first fruit. And this is in YaHUaH, Jeremiah 2, verse 3, meaning a separated portion of humanity offered back to him. Can I ask someone to read it for us? Jeremiah 2, verse 3.
Yeshua was Kadash to YaHUaH, the first fruits of his increase. All who ate of it became guilty. Evil came upon them, declares YaHUaH.
So the reading. So you see a separation portion of humanity offered back to him. So even as the wheat was harvested, refined and weighed before YaHUaH, so too are his people gathered, cleansed, and presented as a living offering. And we can reference this to Romaim or Romans 12, verse 1, and Jacob or James 1, verse 18. I'm going to ask someone to read first.
Romaim 12:1. I call upon you, therefore, brothers, through the compassion of Elohim, to present your bodies a living offering, Kodesh, well pleasing to Elohim, your reasonable worship.
To the and Jacob or James 1, verse 18. Is that car we're already hearing him?
Having purposed it, he brought us forth by the word of truth, for us to be a kind of first fruits of his creatures.
All right, to the for reading. So you see, this is not a metaphor, It is a Torah-based reality. The barley equal resurrection power. YaHUaH's first fruit of the dead. And as we mentioned earlier, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 20. And the wheat, which represent the root-filled body of believers offered in unity to YaHUaH at Shabuath. So the implication. So this connects directly to Ma'asim 2 or Acts 2, when 3,000 beings were added, representing a first fruit people of a renewed covenant. So while at Sinai, 3,000 died for idolatry. And this we can reference to Shamuth or Exodus 32, verse 28. So at Shabuath, 3,000 were made alive by the Ruach, thus reversing the curse through YaHUaH's Ruach. So Shabuath teaches that YaHUaH's people are not spectators of covenant. They are the offering. The wheat does not offer itself. It is the harvest prepared and lifted by the Kahan. So too YaHUaH as Kahan present us as first fruit. And we can reference that to Hebrew 2, verse 11 to 12. We read that earlier. Yes, we did. So the covenant and fire, the Sinai connection, and the Acts 2 fulfillment. So scriptural foundation. We're going to look at Shamuth 19, verse 18 to 20. And we're going to read about Ma'asim 2, verse 3. I'm going to ask someone to grab those for us.
And Mount Sinai was in smoke, all of it, because YaHUaH descended upon it in fire. And its smoke went up into the smoke of a furnace, and all the mountain trembled exceedingly. And when the blast of the ram's horn sounded long and became very strong, Moshe spoke, and Elohim answered him by voice. And YaHUaH came down from Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain. And YaHUaH called Moshe to the top of the mountain, and Moshe went up.
All right. Ma'asim 2, verse 3. Jesus.
There appeared to them divided tongues as of fire and settled
upon each of them. Thurah for reading. So we're going to look on the Hebrew covenant pattern. So we see the feast of Shabuath originally marking the giving of the covenant by at Mount Sinai. This is defined by a divine encounter marked by fire, trembling, and heavenly utterance. So the Hebrew word for covenant, or the barith, the Hebrew word for covenant, the barith, is often ratified through fire and voice. In the same Shamuth or Exodus 19 that we just read, so we see YaHUaH came down upon Mount Sinai in fire to speak his commands directly to the people, not mediated through man alone. So in the Brit Kadasha, or the renewed covenant, this Sinai event is echoed in Acts 2. There again is fire descending, a loud sound from the heavens, the heavenly speech as people speak in various tongues, a gathered multitude from all nations. So these parallels are not coincidental, they are covenantal. The event in Acts is not the beginning of something entirely new, but the renewal of the covenant through giving of the root of YaHUaH, empowering Shabua'uth, our heart, to internalize the same Torah once written on stone. And that can be referenced to Yirmiyahu 31 verse 33 and YaHUaH's 36 verse 26 to 27. And I ask someone just to remind us of those verses.
For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Yisrael after those days, declares YaHUaH. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people.
All right, and YaHUaH's 36, verse 26 to 27.
And I shall give you a new heart, and put a new spirit within you. And I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh, and put my ruach within you. And I shall cause you to walk in my laws, and guard my right rulings, and shall do them.
All right, so that for many of those verses. So the implication in a brief thought, fire represents both purification and divine presence. Shabuath reveals that YaHUaH has always desired to dwell not only among his people, but within them. The fire that once terrified at Sinai becomes the fire of empowerment in Acts 2. The fire signifies that YaHUaH, who gave Torah at Sinai, now writes it on the Shabua'uth, or our hearts, through his rule, not abolishing the Torah, but making obedience possible from within. So Shabua'uth as prophetic declaration of a unified harvest. All right, so we're gonna ask someone just to read for us the scripture foundation here, the Shamuth 23, verse 16, and YaHUaH Matthew 9, verse 37 to 38. So we can go ahead and look at the Hebrew agriculture prophetic view.
And the festival of the harvest, the first fruits of your labors, which you have sown in the field, and the festival of the ingathering, at the outgoing of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field.
Thurah and Matthew 9, verse 37 to 38.
Then he said to his Talmidim, the harvest truly is great, but the workers are few. Pray then that Adon of the harvest would send out workers to his harvest.
All right, Thurah for reading both scriptures, mashpakhah. So again, we're looking at Hebrew agriculture prophetic view. So in the Torah, We see here YaHUaH's feasts are tied to agricultural cycles. As we know, our people back then are more of an agrarian nature. But these are more than natural. They are prophetic pictures of redemptive history. So Shabuath is a harvest feast, signaling not only the ingathering of grain, but the gathering of beings, the fruit of YaHUaH's work among humanity. So the two loaves, reference to Urikara 23, verse 17, are waved before YaHUaH, not consumed by fire, indicating that this is a symbolic offering, not a burnt one. This prefigures the offering of a people, Yehuda and Ephraim, who are still in the process of refinement, yet acceptable because of covenant inclusion. So Yahusha confirmed the harvest motive when he said, "Lift up your eyes. The fields are white for harvest." That is in Yahukanan or John 4, verse 35. Shabuath occurring 7 weeks after Passover season points to spiritual maturation. A people who move from redemption to empowerment and service. So what's the implication? Shabuath is not only a feast of remembrance, it is a forward-looking prophetic declaration of the unity and fullness of YaHUaH's plan. It celebrates the gathering of a Kadash people. It celebrates the equipping of the loyal by the Ruach of YaHUaH. It celebrates the sending of laborers into the harvest field of the world. So it reminds every child of YaHUaH that they have not only experienced deliverance to wait, but delivered to serve as part of the harvest unto YaHUaH. So my mashpakhah, we are on our way to the feast of Shabuath. Are you on this journey with us?